Today on CityCast Denver. Just 3 years ago, Colorado led the country in bank robberies, but new data shows that we're dropping on that list, now down to third behind California and Illinois. Still, for some reason, people seem to rob banks here a lot, and especially in the Denver metro area. So today I'm sitting down with the special agent in charge of Denver's FBI office to understand why and what new techniques he's using to reverse that trend. Today is Monday, December 16th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Mark McCulloch, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Mark, why are bank robberies such a big problem in Colorado?
You know, it's an interesting question, and it's a violation of law that has really stood the test of time. If you look back to the 1930s with John Dillinger and his gang robbing banks and the formation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in the 1930s, so that the federal government would
Is that the FDIC?
Yes.
Is that what that stands for? Good to know.
So it's an interesting crime in that it has spanned the test of time, and Colorado's had its fair share of robberies through the years. I think with many complex societal issues, there is no one clear proximate cause. This is an area that law enforcement, that the banking industry, and social scientists have studied for years. There is just so many unique variables, and we don't have the data to definitively say why we're seeing the problem.
What are some of those variables?
Well, I'd say there's a variety of theories. One is just the prevalence of highways for easy access to escape, for example, number of branches per capita, the dynamics of the banks themselves, their layout, whether they come across as lax in their security procedures. We also see drug use or signs of just desperation. There's also issues associated with state law and whether local law enforcement has robbery as a priority in the state system in terms of bond, and people continuing to reoffend when they're on bond. So it's just a variety of variables to be able to have a definitive answer.
That make us more susceptible than, say, like Wisconsin, which has a similar population, but they had 5 bank robberies in 2023, and we had 104.
It's interesting. I was a case agent in Houston and worked bank robbery and armored car robberies from 2005 to about 2014, and we averaged about 300 a year.
Wow. So it's all of these factors combined. That's so interesting. The one that's interesting to me is the geography, the highways thing. I didn't think about that when it comes to bank robberies, but it's something that makes us attractive for many reasons.
And I think there is definitely a consistent theme. And regardless of all those factors we just talked about, as we interview subjects after we arrest them, I enjoy talking with them to understand why did you do this? And there is a consistent theme that there's just an unrealistic belief that they will be able to get a lot of money quick and get away with it. Even
in this day and age of surveillance and technology, it's still one of those crimes that feels attainable. I don't know if that's the right word, but
that's right. I think that is a good way to describe it. I mean, obviously banks have money; they have cash, and when you look at something like a family business or a 7-Eleven, for example, that may be hit or miss. They may have cash, they may not. The owners of those stores may or may not be armed to defend themselves. And so that's why I describe it as an unrealistic belief, because time and time again we highlight you will be caught if you commit this crime. And so often, I don't know if it's sensationalized in the movies, you're not getting $500,000 and so much cash that you can't carry it out of the bank. We're talking low dollar amounts. So I equate it to being a very high risk, low reward type of crime.
So you've mentioned folks that you've caught and talked to, but is this like something that local bank robbers have gotten away with?
They have. We don't solve 100% of them. We're around 70%, give or take. But we see robbers continue to reoffend. And that's where we start to determine patterns, and we can leverage federal prosecution to have a stronger case and keep them in jail.
So when I think about bank robberies, I think you've kind of alluded to this too, just like the age-old nature of this. But I'm also just thinking about, in my mind, it's like a sort of cartoonish, like criminals wearing masks, smashing windows, like this is a stick-up kind of thing. But is that what we're talking about? Or like, what does the average bank robber or bank robbery look like today? Like, what does that actually look like?
So it really spans the spectrum of different types of robberies and how they're presented. For example, there are demand note robberies where a subject will just come in and pass a note to the teller and will have threatening language. That person could conceal their identity or just walk in normal to try to be nondescript. We have verbal demands for money. We have what we call takeover style robberies, like you see in the movies, where people will come in at mass and several people will come in and take over the bank. Often folks try to conceal their identity with masks or gloves. Sometimes they threaten to have a weapon. Sometimes they display a weapon. Sometimes there are insider type cases where bank employees are part of the scheme. Sometimes hoax bomb devices are part of their scheme to try to distract. And sometimes there's ambush type robberies, whereas employees are opening the branch for the day, for example. Someone's hiding in the bushes and ambushes them. So quite a variety of different types of robberies. Here in Colorado, it seems to be more demand note.
Like walk in, give the bank teller a note.
Right.
Interesting. Do you think that there's anything about us that makes us susceptible to that type of bank robbery, or just sort of what we've ended up with?
No, it's hard to be able to determine all the factors that are involved. I think there is a misunderstanding of the law and the expectation that if I go in and I don't have a knife or a gun, that it's not that big a deal and I'm not going to get arrested. We also see folks that are addicted to drugs that are just completely desperate and aren't really thinking in their right mind what they're doing.
How does technology play a role in these? Because that's what I would think is different from like the 1930s versus now. How has technology impacted how banks are robbed?
So it really has impacted how we solve crimes, not just with bank robbery, and a lot of the work that we do. You look at cameras, for example. Obviously, there's been advances in technology when it comes to camera systems, not only in the bank but outside the bank. Right, there are cameras everywhere, so I'll be able to systematically track you as you walk to the bank, commit the robbery, and leave. Those camera systems, they increase their resolution and quality, so we're able to see distinguishing characteristics of the offender, what kind of car they get in, what they're wearing, and so forth. So those are really good leads for us. We work consistently with the banking industry to continue to help them essentially harden the target to mitigate vulnerabilities. So we work with them when it comes to physical security, the locks and alarms in their doors, their silent alarms, for example. Access control, sometimes you see it's referred to as a man trap, where you're buzzed to come in.
That's how it is at my bank. Yeah, you have to get buzzed to come in.
Yeah, so that's a mitigation effort with use of technology to try to control access. In addition to that, we also have some banks that have what are called bandit barriers, where it's the bulletproof glass that you see between the teller and the customer. There's a variety of anti-robbery controls that banks across institutions employ. For example, die packs, so that you take cash and walk out of the bank and then it explodes and you're covered in ink. Bait bills, electronic devices, the presence of armed security guards are all different types of technology mitigation efforts that banks can use to harden the target and then for us to help us solve the case. And of course, on the law enforcement side, technology has really helped us in our capabilities. DNA, for example, fingerprints, hair and fibers, handwriting analysis, all of that is used in investigating a bank robbery.
I have to say I'm surprised again with the amount of surveillance that we have in the world, that people still do this, because I think about I'm surveilled at Target. There's a camera facing me when I'm checking out, or we see other crimes where they've caught someone walking down the street from people's different Ring cameras and stuff. And do you think that those things have deterred people at all, or is it part of that thought process that I can do this, I'm invincible?
I think folks that make the decision to commit a bank robbery aren't thinking about those kind of factors.
It seems like so the first thing I would think of, but
Right.
I've never robbed a bank, so I have no idea. So Colorado led the country in bank robberies in 2021, but the most recent yearly total reported for 2023 was way down. And we're now third behind Illinois and California. What happened? What changed for Colorado?
Specific to Colorado, we have changed our strategy, and it appears to be working. For background, as part of FBI Denver, we have the Rocky Mountain Safe Streets Task Force. It is a 13-agency task force that we lead in the FBI that handles violent crime, specifically bank robberies. So we respond to every single bank robbery in the metro area. And we do that in conjunction with local law enforcement, as they're often the first responders on the scene. But the key strategy change for us is how we develop cases and how we prosecute them. So for background, robbery is a crime that is really concurrent jurisdiction. When it comes to the states, they get folded into an already overwhelmed criminal justice system. So there may be delays in how they're prosecuted, or somebody's out on bond waiting a trial or a disposition. And then there's often parole on the state side too. So even if someone is convicted, they may not serve their full prison term. Contrast that with the feds. It is a violation of federal law to rob a bank and can carry a maximum penalty up to 20 years. So starting in 2023, we changed our philosophy and secured agreement to take more cases federal, with the end goal of reducing the recidivism, the revolving door of people being charged and continuing to rob, and to serve as a deterrent because of that high prison sentence. As a result of that, we're taking serial offenders off the street for a longer period of time. So crooks think if I just rob a bank in Aurora, then Aurora PD is going to be focused on that. But if I go in Denver, I have a clean slate because this is a new robbery for Denver Police Department. Well, both are on our task force. And so from 2023 and 2024, we started taking more cases federal, to the point where about 3/4 or so, or a little bit less, are going federal now. And we're seeing a drop in those robberies. And we're seeing the clusters of subjects that we're arresting for multiple robberies that are getting some significant prison time.
Wow.
So that is a heavy weight. And we use that sparingly on the right cases that are serial offenders and are terrorizing our citizens. But then also to highlight that in the media and different venues like this to be able to deter people from robbing banks in the first place.
So maybe like getting the word out, like this is actually
Yes.
a very serious crime. Even if you don't hurt someone or get away, you still can serve quite a bit of time.
That's right. This is a crime of violence. When these subjects go into a bank, and whether it is a threatening note or displaying a weapon, they are terrorizing bank employees and customers and are impacting the public safety here. And that's why we have invested so much in the FBI with our task force to be able to deter and reduce this crime problem.
Who are these bank robbers? Like, I'm thinking about this one guy that was named the Penguin Bandit for his like distinct gait. And I have to say, I've watched Home Alone a lot in the last couple of weeks because of Christmas, and I have a 3-year-old who's obsessed with it. But I'm like thinking about like thieves, like these bumbling like Harry and Marv types. But like, who are the folks that you are catching doing this?
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. I have seen subjects of different age, race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic class. It really spans the complete spectrum. The case you mentioned is an interesting one, and a good example of how we leverage our partnership with Crime Stoppers to be able to solve a case. As you mentioned, he was dubbed the Penguin Bandit in the media on account of kind of his stockiness and the way that he walked. So back to technology, the use of cameras and everything. When we get pictures, right, we put those out in the media. And despite having a ski mask, we received a tip from the public that recognized the way that he was walking and allowed us to take some other investigative steps to get him identified. So I think it's a good example of the partnership between the public by way of Crime Stoppers, the industry, and law enforcement. He was sentenced after robbing 4 banks and getting ready to do a 5th to 13 years in federal prison.
Wow. So are nicknames a common thing? Like, do you think that that's helpful, or is that like giving some folks the notoriety maybe they're looking for in this kind of a crime?
I think it's helpful. We did this a lot in Houston to help generate some public attention. I don't consider it an avenue for notoriety because we don't know the subject's name, and it creates the buzz and the eyes that we need to be able to solve it. And then they move down the system. But I think that's a way to kind of rise above the issues of the day and get people focused, because so often we do rely on the public for helping us identify these criminals.
I think that's a perfect example too. Like you're saying, it wasn't his face; it was his walk that someone recognized in the public. And if that wasn't something that had been talked about in the media, that guy maybe never would have been caught.
Right.
That's so interesting. You've kind of talked about this, what motivates a typical bank robber, but like, I'm trying to think about how these things correlate beyond just like, someone who's in a really desperate situation, or again, like you said, is a drug user and is maybe looking for, you're in a sense of desperation in that place too. But like, does this correlate to bigger things like the pandemic or recessions? Like, do we see more folks committing these crimes because of socioeconomic trends?
We don't have a definitive answer, but that has to be one of the contributing factors. For sure, because again, the motivation is to get money. In addition to folks that feel desperate or are addicted to drugs, we also on occasion see kind of organized groups, criminal crews that work together. And in fact, earlier this year, we arrested a group, and the main subject of that crew was paying underlings in fentanyl. So getting people to go rob banks and bring the money back to him, and then he would pay them in fentanyl. So that's what I mean. There's just such a variety of factors, and it really is just a scheme to unlawfully get money.
That's so wild. So you've mentioned that the FBI has invested a lot of resources in reducing bank robberies here in Colorado. Are they a big priority in general for the FBI over other types of crimes right now?
It's difficult to prioritize with the span of criminal and national security violations we're responsible for working. But we have 55 field offices across the nation, and each field office has at least one violent crime squad. There are violations of law that we are uniquely responsible for, and bank robbery is one of those. So we don't take our foot off the gas when it comes to that. Just last year alone, we arrested around 20,000 violent offenders and child predators. That's about 55 arrests per day, every day, on average. So
many.
And this is one of many criminal violations that we work.
What is your top priority right now in Denver? What are you all working on maybe the most, or have the most focus on?
So a little bit of everything. On the criminal side, Colorado is no different than what we're seeing across the nation. So in addition to violent crime, we're seeing organized violence in terms of gangs, neighborhood-based gangs, robbery crews. There's been a lot of the news recently about business owners being robbed at their house, or burglaries, for example. So a lot of organized violence. We have crimes against children, the online predators, human trafficking, sex trafficking seems to be pretty prevalent here. Of course, fentanyl is all hands on deck across government to be able to stop the flow of fentanyl, to be able to target the money, stop the precursors and the drugs from coming into the nation, holding offenders accountable that provide fentanyl to people that overdose. Traditional white-collar crimes, frauds and scams are through the roof. When you look at elder fraud, when you look at online scams, bank scams and so forth. And then on the national security side, where obviously we will prevent the United States from being attacked by terrorists. So counterterrorism, both overseas and domestic terrorism here are a priority. Cyber crimes, both on the criminal and national security side, are significant here. And that's just off the top of my head.
I know, I was like, that's like 20 things. Oh my gosh. So I guess how big is this threat of bank robberies to, say, the average Denverite?
I think it depends on if you're in the banking industry or you walk in to use a bank. Obviously, it's very important to them. You know, as we started this, I find that it is an interesting violation because nowadays with cyber and just the prevalence of different types of scams, this has stood the test of time. So if you are involved in the banking community and you bank on a regular basis in person, this would be of high importance in my mind. There, I will never forget, as a young case agent in Houston, one of the first bank robberies or attempted robberies I went to was a demand note. A young male came in and slipped a note to a teller, and the teller laughed and said, "We're not going to do that," and pushed the note back to the subject.
Oh my gosh.
The subject, really not knowing what to do, walked away.
Oh, phew.
So we came for the attempted robbery and interviewed everybody, and people were in a state of shock, but nothing too heavy. And they had asked, "Well, do you think this person will come back?" And I said, "Well, it hasn't been my experience that people will be robbed again. Obviously, law enforcement is here." I left that scene, and 15 minutes later, their crew came in with a violent takeover. With weapons, assaulted the employees.
Oh, my goodness.
And I came, and as I'm driving to the office, I get the call to come back, and I come back, and the mood is completely different.
Yeah.
Everyone is in tears, in a state of shock, and you could see it. It was visceral, and to me, that was an early example of how impactful this is when you are on the receiving end of a robbery.
Yeah, I mean, it's a traumatic experience. And like you said, if they had felt that, like, whew, we made it, we didn't get it, you're almost like your guard is down and you're not. That was an interesting response too. I would say, I don't know. I worked in retail for 17 years and luckily I never had to deal with anything like this, but I can't imagine what I would feel or how I would respond if I was faced with that, someone just slipping me the note. That's a really interesting reaction.
Yeah. I think everybody kind of responds to stress differently. And
totally.
In Houston, we had crews that just did violent takeovers that would just run in and immediately assault an employee.
Oh my gosh.
And to come in the aftermath of that, you see firsthand the lasting impact that it has on, not only employees that are there as part of their job, but the mom and their 7-year-old daughter
totally just at the bank.
Had to cash a check really quick, and then before they know it, are on the ground with a gun to their face.
Oh my gosh. That is so scary. And I understand why banks don't want to talk about this from a PR perspective, but I think it's helpful for folks to know that this is something that's being actively addressed.
That's right. So, and our numbers are going down.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm just thinking now about what I belong to 2 credit unions, and one I go to, the majority of the employees there are young women. And I just was thinking now about them being on the front lines of this potential violent crime is crazy. But it sounds like you all are on it.
We are.
Do you think Colorado will drop down even lower on this list next year based on the work you all are doing?
I hope so. I can't control what the subjects decide to do, but what I can control is the resources and the prioritization that we will invest in this. So my message to people that are considering this would be not to do it. This is a very high-risk, low-reward crime. We consider it violent and that you are terrorizing this community, and we will dedicate task force and federal resources to ensure that you are identified and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. This was really fascinating.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell your bank teller about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. Now I'm thinking about that Fun-Lovin' Criminal song about robbing banks on Scooby snacks. What a 90s moment I am having before you were born, Olivia. Nothing you need to concern yourself with, nor was the song that good. They were one of those bands that were from New York and got really popular like in England and never really got that popular here for reasons.